And we have tonight, I'm glad to say, Robert Barrington, who is Director of External Affairs at Transparency International UK, who are probably the most knowledgeable NGO in the world on anti-corruption. Robert was previously Director of Governance and Sustainable Investment at F&C Asset Management and CEO Europe of the environmental research group Earthwatch Institute. Therefore, he has a very, very wide range of knowledge on this subject. Robert.
Thank you, Jeff, and good evening, everybody. I don't have the anecdotes, I'm afraid, but being Transparency International, I do have some statistics, and I get to test them out on you to see who knows, who can guess. First of all, just to give some background as to why legislators around the world, not just in the UK, are putting in place things like the Bribery Act. The World Bank estimate of the annual amount of bribes paid. Does anybody want to guess? What's the size of the bribe market?
Well, I know the answer from your book, so I won't give it.
Come on, somebody, give me a guess.
$10 billion.
So $10 billion? You're a vast optimist. 1 trillion, that's right. $1 trillion. So we're not talking about a small amount of bribes here. It's massive. I mean, you know, some of the figures being used for bailing out Portugal or other countries, they're talking about a measly, you know, few billion, tens of billions of dollars. This is $1 trillion of bribes being paid. Well, what kind of damage does it do? I want to tell you about a study that's quoted in Paul Collier's book. Paul Collier, the Oxford economist, has written a fascinating book on development called The Bottom Billion. And he quotes a study that traces $100 of development aid that goes into the health system in Chad, destined for rural health centres. And of the $100 that goes in at the top, guess how much comes out at the bottom for the rural health clinics? Anybody want to guess? It's $1. So now, of the 99 missing dollars in every 100, of course, it's not all going through corruption. It will be fraud and mismanagement and stupidity and ignorance and theft and all sorts of other things. But the general estimates around of how much development money goes astray is between 20 and 30%. So one's talking about a fairly large amount. So this is a big business, and it really hurts people on the ground. In that context, of course, the people in rural Chad who desperately need healthcare but just aren't getting it, not because the money isn't put into the system, but because people are stealing it along the way. Well, if you're an NGO like TI, what on earth do you do about that? I mean, where do you start? You know, $1 trillion, huge self-interest in all sorts of people around the world in maintaining the system as it is, because a lot of people are getting very rich out of it. What do you do? Well, you know, one of the starting points has to be you make sure that the laws are in place. So at least you can say this is wrong and it's illegal. And that's part of what this Bribery Act is for. And of course, it's one thing having laws saying don't take bribes, but as the other panelists have said, you've got to have the laws that say don't pay the bribes. If there's one thing that really, really irritates my colleagues in Transparency International around the world, and we've got chapters in 90 countries, it is the attitude that says all the bribe paying takes place in the countries that score badly on our Corruption Perceptions Index. And they rightly point out, as our other speakers has, that it takes two to tango, that you have the bribe payer as well as the bribe taker. And if you cut off the supply side, then you've solved part of the problem. Not the whole problem, but you've solved part of it. So that's the context in which we need to see this Bribery Act. And it's not by any means unique to the UK. One thing that's been a slightly distressing but perhaps inevitable aspect of the debate over the last few months has been this sense that somehow the UK is going out on a limb, that we're producing gold-plated legislation. I've even heard one comment in one of the newspapers, I won't shame them by naming which one, saying, you know, yet more of this legislation being passed down from Brussels. You know, it's nothing to do with Brussels. It's, but what it is, there's a global context here. And interestingly, the chair of the OECD Anti-Bribery Working Group says he thinks that our Bribery Act is actually pretty middle of the road. It's by no means the harshest legislation around the world. Now I say, with deference to Roderick on the panel, Roderick of course wrote this fantastic act. We at TI think it's a pretty good act. You know, it does the business from our point of view. We have reservations about the guidance. Indeed, our press release described it as deplorable. Roderick also wrote the guidance, so sorry, Roderick. if you read the detail of our press release, you'll see we think it's deplorable because of the political intervention that has watered down the guidance in various ways. But some of the guidance is extremely helpful. There's no doubt about that. I don't blame Roderick for having political masters who have forced unpleasant compromises on him, and clearly he can't talk about that because he's a civil servant, so I'll talk about it on his behalf. So, you know, some of the myths about the Act, it's not gold-plated legislation, and there has been concern, I think legitimate concern, that it's going to disadvantage British business in some way, that there won't be a level playing field. Well, of course, that would be true if only British companies were prevented from paying bribes. That's not at all the case. There are, in our own Act, extraterritorial provisions, so it can capture foreign companies as well. Much other bribery legislation around the world is extraterritorial, including the US Foreign and Corrupt Practices Act, so that gets other companies. And most importantly, it's not just the UK that is refreshing its legislation. That is happening around the world. The G20 has for the first time adopted corruption as one of its priorities. And one will see, I hope, in the November G20 meeting, an announcement of various initiatives to tackle corruption, many of them focused on the corporate sector. So this is a great advance for the UK. We're not out of step with everybody else. We shouldn't beat ourselves up about doing something that is disadvantaging our business. In fact, we've done something tremendous for society, tremendous for the world, and indeed tremendous for business. There may be some short-term pain. Putting in place an anti-bribery system, that's difficult for some businesses if they haven't done it before. So there will be some short-term pain, perhaps some short-term investment. But as Roderick has been at pains to point out, it shouldn't be disproportionate. You know, there's no point going overboard. If you're running a corner shop somewhere with absolutely no links overseas, don't put in place an anti-bribery system. If you're an oil and gas company operating in the Congo, put one in place that's pretty advanced. So you have to be reasonable in your approach to these things. Just the final thing I'll say is we should remember, in all the noise about of criticism of the Act that there has been from certain newspapers, particularly the Evening Standard, this is not an anti-business Act. This is an anti-bribery Act. It's designed to prevent the wrong, the evil that is bribe pay. That's what it's there for, and that's what it's intended to catch. So don't be kidded that this is somehow an anti-business Act. It's an anti-bribery Act. And the solution, if you're a business, is just make sure nobody in your business and nobody associated with you is paying bribes. Don't pay bribes, and you won't be caught by the Bribery Act. It's as simple as that. So well done, Roderick. Great Act. Sorry about the guidance. It's good in parts. And thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. Thank you.